Hello everyone. Now, it may surprise you to hear that there are people in the business who don't like me. I know, I was shocked too. I can't believe it. But the main reason seems to be about misunderstandings about my view on the use of scrap steel. And as a bit of an aside, I really think that one of the most dangerous things, now I used to work in sociology, behavioral psychology, and one of the most dangerous things on the planet is every human's incessant need to assume information. And the technical term for it is a Bayesian strategy. A Bayesian strategy is when you don't have all of the facts about something and you feel that you're in a situation that you can't get all the facts, and so you fill in the gaps of your knowledge about what you know is to be fact with assumptions. And those assumptions, more often than not, are wrong. And that leads to incomplete strategies. This leads to arguments. This leads to misunderstandings. This leads to all sorts of bad things that happen in the world that could be fixed by simple communication. And communication is not just talking. Communication is also listening. And so assumptions have been made about my views on scrap steel, and I figured the best way to do that is to communicate. And now I get a lot of people who don't want to actually talk to me about it, but like to actually say things to other people and talk around behind my back and all that, based off incorrect assumptions. And the incorrect assumption is usually that I think that everyone should use scrap steel because it's better, and you don't need to use known steel because, you know, scrap's available cheap to free, and so on and so forth. You get the picture. And it's really not the case. My view on scrap steel, I've made fairly clear. My assumption is that I've made it fairly clear, but clearly it's not. Do watch my video on known versus scrap steel. I'll link it up the top. I can never work out, is it going to be this way or this way? Sometimes it's mirrored, sometimes not. Phones scare and confuse me. I'm a grumpy old man. That video sort of shows my view, and I do give equal weight to both because there are pros and cons to both sides of the coin. The reason that I use scrap steel so much, like old files, things like that, is because I like my pieces to have a story. And if your story begins with, and first the steel was made in a steel yard and was handed to the knife maker who then turned it into a knife, there's no story in that. Some customers, though, don't give a good goddamn about the story, and they just want a knife that does the job. And so when that's the case, yeah, known steel's where it's at. Especially some of the super steels that are out there, amazing, and they can perform in ways that scrap steel can never be made to perform. So yeah, my standpoint is, if you want to make an art piece with a story, and that doesn't mean you can't make art pieces with known steel, you absolutely can. And people out there like Kyle Royer know exactly what I'm talking about. You can make masterful work with known steel, but sometimes it's nice to have that journey of something that was old and discarded and thrown away, like an old file or a leaf spring from a truck or something like that. It was thrown away, it was forgotten about. And to turn that into something not only beautiful, but functional, and something that can receive adoration and love from a new owner and potentially even become a family heirloom, that story of that journey is something that's, I think, is a very precious aspect of the craft that cannot be created with known steel. That being said, that doesn't mean every project needs to have that, and it may surprise certain people watching this to know that I use known steel far more often. It's probably about 70% of the cases I use known steel for the work that I do. And it's simply because I like it to be predictable. I like to know exactly what I'm working with and what I need to do with it to make it do the things that I want it to do. And so there you go. I use known steel more often than I use scrap steel. But I like to use scrap steel when I'm trying to seek that journey. And it's like a Farrier's rasp knife. Now, Farrier's rasps are commonly misunderstood to be W2 steel. They're not. And they're actually made of usually a lower grade steel than something like a file, and don't hold an edge quite as well as steel that's often used to make files. Now, steel that's often used to make files, often, not always, but often, is something equivalent to W2 or 1095. And I talk about equivalency in that video, my known versus scrap video. Farrier's rasps are usually made of something that doesn't quite harden as well, so you don't always get the best knives out of Farrier's rasps. Doesn't mean you can't. Doesn't mean that you know, you can't get a great knife. However, what you can get is a knife that has an amazing pattern, a bit like this one that I made, this Bowie knife made from a Farrier's rasp. And the pattern of the teeth of a Farrier's rasp, which you can kind of see in this horrible rusty one that I've got here, you know, small teeth on one side, big teeth on the other side, the pattern of those teeth means something to some people. People who love horses, people who work with horses, people who are farriers and want to have a knife. And that meaning can't be gotten in known steel without a hell of a lot of machining work. And also just knowing that it was made from a Farrier's rasp can make a big difference. Now, if you heat treat a Farrier's rasp right, you can get a really decent knife out of it. It's really decent. You won't get as durable a knife as something that some of the known super steels that are out there. Of course not. But can you get a decent knife out of it? But yeah. Can you achieve a knife that means something to somebody who has a connection with horses and farriering and all that? Absolutely. And so it's a journey that can't be simulated, really, with known steel. And so that is my stance. Sometimes I want to make a piece that's got that story, got that journey, got that history, connects to somebody, connects to the end user in a way that something that's just made out of a bar of steel from a factory can't do. So after I finish recording this video, I'm actually going to be going and grabbing some bars of 1084 that I got from Creative Man, and I'm going to be making knives out of those, and it's going to be great, and they're going to be good knives, and no better than knives that I've made from scrap steel in the past. And so it comes down to what can you get, what can you afford, and what can you make from it, and how much theory are you going to learn about heat treating correctly. And like I say in my known versus scrap video, which I still recommend you watch if you haven't already, how far are you willing to test it to make sure it's going to survive, that there haven't been any microfractures in that scrap that are going to cause issues for you? And really test it. But I'll tell you what, I do the same level of hardcore testing on knives that I've made out of that 1084, despite the fact that I went through and heat treated it with all the same parameters and preheating my oil and all that sort of thing. Doesn't mean I'm going to necessarily get the exact same heat treatment, because errors happen, anomalies happen. So I still test them just the same as I test a scrap steel knife. So there you go. Hopefully that clarifies something, because I know that there are some people that have some very low opinions of me because of these assumptions that I just tell everybody that they should always use scrap steel and never use known steel, like the demon that I am. But no, there are some great suppliers of known steel out there. Creative Man's one of them. But just the most important thing is get out there, experiment, and have fun with it. You know, if you want to make a piece that's got that story behind the materials, you go for it. Don't let anybody tell you otherwise. And otherwise, I'm going to get back to work. Be sure to check me out on Instagram, at Facebook, and at Patreon and my Etsy store. All the details are in the description below. And I'll catch you guys on the next video. See you later.